His Majesty the King has always emphasized that we can overcome any challenge we are faced with if we work all together. We must put in every effort and all possible means to provide timely intervention and services to support the well-being of our people. It is crucial now that as a nation we embody that spirit of community and nurture a society that works to ensure that no person suffers in silence, and that we support each other with compassion and kindness through any struggle or adversity. Mental health will have the national priority it deserves. Her Majesty the Gelson, November the 3rd, 2021. Gusasambolo, welcome to this special edition of Bhutan Dialogues. Bhutan Dialogues is a joint initiative between the United Nations and the Loden Foundation with the aim to create a public platform in Bhutan for deep dialogue, discourse and mindful listening focused on the country's developmental issues. Our theme for today is Mental Health Matters. Her Majesty's message conveys that investment in mental health promotion and response to mental health challenges is now a national priority, with the intent to accelerate and to amplify the efforts already being made by a diversity of partners, including government, civil society, development partners, volunteers, religious leaders, and the media, to name just a few actors. Our speaker today is Her Excellency Dasho Dechen Wangmo. She is the only female minister in the current cabinet of Bhutan. Prior to joining politics in 2018, Her Excellency worked as a public health international consultant with a primary focus on the health systems, governance, policy, and strategic planning for governments and civil societies in many countries. Our host today is Gerald Daly, the resident coordinator of the United Nations in Bhutan. So without further ado, over to you, Gerald.
Thank you, Will. Dechen, welcome to your UN house. We will be focusing primarily in today's conversation on mental health, but then we'll segue into other areas that pertain to the work, the important work that you're doing and have done for this country. We start off relatively easy with a few easy questions, and then we start to do a bit of a deeper dive. So the first question is, what initially inspired you to become a health professional?
Thank you, Will, for the introduction, Jerry, for having me here at the UN House. It's always a pleasure to be here. I think, if I remember correctly, I think I really wanted to become a doctor. After my 5 years of schooling, then I realized, working in few hospitals, that it was not my cup of tea. So then I ventured into doing public health work and research and fell in love with it. And then I realized that is my calling, and this is where I went into it. I think, of course, I've always had a very soft corner for the health sector. May not be as a clinician, but as a public health, I think this is where my passion is, I think, even at a very young age.
So, of course, everybody has a resume or a CV, but there's so much more to a person's life than their resume or their CV. Are there two things that you would like to say are extra interesting about yourself that none of us will ever be able to find in your resume?
I want to define this. I'm a very microscopic mother when it comes to my 10-year-old son. I'm very, very extremely particular about his health, what he eats. So I am what we call in today's world a helicoptering parent, because I like to be keeping an eye on whatever he does, which I think now I'm beginning to think that it's not so good, that I should give him that freedom, but of course, extremely a cautious mother. And then I think something that I really enjoy is cooking. I'm very passionate about it, and I think that is something that I refrain from mentioning in my CV.
So, of course, in Bhutan Dialogues, we often have a lot of young people in the audience, because we're trying to think about the future of Bhutan and how we can help out these young people. And from my perspective, I'm very interested in the role of mentors for these young people, but I'm also very interested in helping these young people with their careers. So, based on your own experience, do you have any tips that you would give these young people starting off their life after college oftentimes, but even those that are still in college? Do you have any tips for the careers that they might have in the future?
I think in terms of, as you mentioned, the mentorship is very important. Not just looking up to what we traditionally grow up as role models, but actually a mentor who can actually guide you throughout this journey. And it is a difficult journey sometimes. You have to make choices so that you are able to make the right choice. You want some guidance, and not even as a traditional guidance, but someone you can talk to and say, what are my options? Because at the end of the day, I think you have to, as a person, have to make that choice, but that you are able to make an informed choice. And to make that informed choice, you need to have a dialogue, you need to have conversation, be that with your parents, with your best friend, with your colleagues, with someone you appreciate, admire. It doesn't matter who it is, but you need to have that dialogue, you need to have that conversation. So I personally find that to be very informative, because most times you are unsure. Doesn't matter where you are in your life, whether you are young, starting early, or you have matured, you are in certain position, but it's always good to have conversation. There's always an opportunity to learn. There's always an opportunity to get guidance. I always feel that we always have to talk and have that space for conversation.
So, mental health in Bhutan. What is the current status of mental health? And in terms of the challenges, what do you see as the best solutions?
Okay. I think mental health, I think first and foremost we must acknowledge that not just Bhutan, but globally, mental health the agenda itself has not gotten the due attention that it deserves. Now, of course, as the whole world is going through this pandemic, we realize that it is important to look at it. And now it's wonderful to see a little bit of momentum globally as well. If you look at the Southeast Asia region, our region where we are, we realize both in terms of policy, the whole related to mental health, the policy, the legislation, the enabling environment. If you look at services, in terms of having referral services, treatment provisions, and then rehabilitation services. And then if you look at the governance structure, across the region, I think it is fair to say a forgotten agenda. In Bhutan, of course, it is a concern. When we look at relatively compared to what is happening in the region, it may not be at that scale where, we are really at the tip, but it is a major concern. Bhutan, again, has been very, very fortunate to have Her Majesty, the Queen, the Gelson, being very passionate about this cause. And not only have the passion, but also have the dedication and commitment to really put in a comprehensive service and system in place. Not just address mental health in piecemeal, but actually holistically look at mental health. And when we say holistically, we wanted to take the what we call the whole of a life approach from the birth till you age. Throughout this journey, what are the services available, what are the legislation that are there, what are treatment options, and be able to provide that in the most comprehensive manner. So this is the aspiration of Her Majesty the Queen, and we are of course Ministry as Ministry of Health as the institution that is mandated by the WHO Charter to also look at mental health, is extremely happy and pleased to be part of this journey. So I think the transformation that we will see for mental health in Bhutan will be, I am quite confident that will be very different from the rest of the world, where we are for the first time tackling this issue in a most holistic and comprehensive manner.
So if I've been listening carefully, you used the word holistic, I think twice. So traditionally the lamas and the village elders often served as counselors here in Bhutan. But today many of the young people have a different set of values. So what can we do to bridge this gap between the traditional way of responding to challenges, mental health challenges, and this new world where perhaps young people don't believe in that old system?
I think we just cannot look at mental health issue as one issue in isolation. We have to take into context the developmental things that are happening, the evolution of culture, the evolution of tradition, the so-called modernization, the way the family structures and social structures and fabrics are constructed. So in light of what is happening today, we are very different from today compared to few decades back, where we had very good social network. So today, think of it, I'm just remembering a conversation with one of my very good friend here in Thimphu, who has absolutely no support system. She's working here, she has no grandparents or parents where she can leave her kids with. So she is juggling with this idea of having to raise a kid on her own without the social support and the network. So the times have changed, and we must acknowledge that time and to bring in more services there. So under the Her Majesty's initiative, there are 4 things that we are particularly looking at. One is, rather than providing a very passive service of saying, okay, here is a counselor, if you have problem, come to me. We actually want to change that paradigm and say we want to provide proactive services. We actually wanted to see who are people in trouble that we can give support to. So this is providing proactive services to our people. Second one is enabling environment, and this is where we are looking at change in policies and legislation, be that at workplace, having support network within workplace, or support network socially and in health facilities. Other one is the partnership. How can we enhance partnership, be that with the UN multilateral organization, bilateral organization, CSOs, religious body. And this is where I think we need to have a framework whereby we know our roles and responsibility. As a partner, how do you come in? Where do you come in? What are the opportunities that you bring in? So this is where we want to map out the whole sector's strength and opportunities, so that we can come up with this comprehensive program. And the last one is, of course, advocacy. Being aware of what are the issues of mental health. Do we even have open conversation about mental health? Do we have conversation about psychosis, dementia, depression? How open are we to have these kind of dialogues, both in the house, in the 4 walls of your rooms, or in the community, or in the larger space of national agenda? So this is where these are the major 4 elements that we are looking at, and this would, of course, as we go forward with implementing these programs, we will have to keep in mind how things are changing, how country is evolving, how society is evolving, the relationship, the dynamics, the sense of the so-called the community vitality, where are these, how are they evolving? So all these, I think, factors needs to be considered as we go forward.
I'll have to admit, as I'm listening to you today speak about this, I'm just realizing how big a challenge lies ahead for us, because it is complicated, and not so many people talk about the challenges of modernization here in Bhutan. And it's because it's very difficult to actually hold in your hand. It's a little bit like holding water in your hand, but it is a huge challenge when the community supports for that woman you just spoke about. She doesn't have them anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm able to understand it very clearly how you explained it. Of course, one of the agents that impacts people's health are these digital tools we all have, these gadgets, social media. Many people today have screen addictions, which is damaging our minds, damaging our eyes. Just many people are, even simple things like not getting enough sleep at night. So, should we be thinking about ways to restrict or curtail the use of social media in our homes, and especially among young people? And earlier on you spoke about your own son. Do you have any, are you applying any, at a personal level, are you applying any practices with your own son that you would recommend for any of the parents who are listening into this Bhutan Dialogue?
I think in terms of screen time, of course, there are tons of study that shows that it is bad. I really don't know how we can control or put restriction on the screen time. I know some countries have taken drastic measures of basically blocking social media for a certain period of time or certain days of the week. Some countries have done that. I don't know the mechanics or the strategy for how to do it. Do I want to do it at a personal level? Absolutely, because I think this is also, I know BCMD, for example, did a very beautiful social media awareness where they said social media is not a reality. Or what you see on social media, that is not a reality. So things like that. I think in one hand we see a lot of value in social media. On the other side, there are also a lot of drawbacks. So how do we achieve this balance? I'm sure Bhutan is not the only country that is struggling with this. I think globally every country is struggling with this. Every mother is struggling with how to cut down on screen time. Unfortunately for me, my son has ADHD, so biologically he cannot hold his attention in front of a screen for a long time. So for me that is very good. Of course, I don't allow him during weekdays, so absolutely out of question during weekdays, and then he's allowed to look at iPad only on Saturdays. So then Sundays, we have other activities lined up. So, but biologically, I mean, I look at his own peers, which moment the weekend comes, it's very difficult for them to detach themselves from the screen. And now we see parents who, if the kid is cranky, you just give them your phone or give them an iPad. Is that a good trend? I don't know, but I think exposing that to that level of information without having the capacity to process that brain and seeing what is good and what is bad, I do see a slight risk in there. Do I want to control it? Absolutely. Do I know how to do it? I don't think so. I have the answer for that.
When you became a cardiac specialist, you mentioned recently that you could not land a job. What opportunities are there for young people who wish to work as mental health specialists?
I think going forward, I think that's probably a profession that machines cannot replace. You want that shoulder to cry on. You want someone there to talk to, not talk to a machine, because it is to do with emotions. When we are talking about mental health, it's to do with the human emotion. So that human connection and that human relation will always be there. So I feel going forward, I think there is many opportunity to not only get into the area of mental health, but also opportunity to specialize in certain fields, because how you manage a child and how you manage an adult is very different, psychologically, physiologically. So this is where I personally feel that there's a lot of opportunities there.
I think you mentioned to me recently something along the lines of one of our colleges is helping young people with qualifications. What are your thoughts about how that work within the Royal University of Bhutan can be a springboard for developing our own cadre of specialists in this area? Any thoughts?
Many opportunities for specialization, and this is something that I would also like to echo what His Majesty often says about building the capacity and the competency of our own people. So they are at some point at par internationally with experts who are at the international caliber. So this is where I think our own counselors, because just now if you look at the counseling field itself, it is also in a very infant stage at the moment, where we don't have specialization. We feel, attending 3 weeks training on counseling, you become a counselor. But at the end of the day, you're playing with somebody's mind. So you have to have a very in-depth understanding of how the mind functions. So which means we need to give adequate skills and knowledge. So this is where I think we also have an opportunity to really strengthen these programs, be that programs with CSOs or with the KGUMS or with any of the RUB colleges, but not just provide the superficial information, but actually go deep down and give them the competency and the skills to be able to deliver quality care.
Limpo, of course, you're also Vice Chair of the NCWC. And I know you're concerned at increasing incidents of gender-based violence, sexual harassment. What is your advice to those people who are being violated? And what is your advice to the caretakers or those that are responsible for the agencies within which these incidents, I don't even want to say incidents, these aggressions are happening?
I think it is like you mentioned, it is a concern, and when we talk about gender or gender issues or abuse, it's always NCWC that comes into picture. But and I'll be very candid here. I feel it's an issue that every agency must look into it. It's every agency's mandate that you have a safe space for you to work. Hats off to people who have come forward. It is very difficult to come forward. If you have gone through these, to go and say, oh, I've been abused, I need justice. And this is where I think the first step is very important. So even although we have laws, legislations, I think there needs to be aggressive dissemination of these laws and legislation, so people are aware that if you violate somebody, that there are consequences. And certain measures needs to be put in place so that institution themselves takes the responsibility and not wait for NCWC to come and say you're doing wrong or you need to do this. But I think that responsibility will have to come from within the institution, and I think it should be everybody's mandate to to prevent any form of violence, be that at workplace or at home. So I think the advocacy is much needed.
The status of women in society over recent weeks, I feel many people are saying, has received an incredible boost with the appointment of the 3 female secretaries. You yourself had to overcome the challenges of being a woman in a political world which is often dominated by men. In order to practically advance the status of women in Bhutan, what are the 2 priorities we should focus on over the coming 2 years to practically strengthen the voice and power of women?
I agree that it's as I mentioned to you earlier, it is historic to have 3 female secretaries. I was extremely happy, ecstatic, I must say. But at the same time, I think when we look at in politics, for example, I feel if we create enough enabling environment for women to come forward, there is a lot of confidence, public confidence. If you look at the third government election, we had 10 women participating in politics, and of which 7 women got elected. That is 70%. That is a very good record. But how do we then encourage more women to come forward to participate? And this is where I think we need to design enabling factors, hand-holding, mentoring them, teaching them, so that they have an equal level playing field with men as well. I often give this example of playing archery. Men go, they play archery, they have a good network, but women do not have that. I'm not saying women should all go and practice archery, but we do not have such platforms where we get to network, we get to interact, exchange ideas. So this is where by design there are no opportunities. This is where we can think about creating a more enabling environment where we need to do a little more hand-holding to women than men. BINU has a women's caucus, which is actually very good, because through this BINU's initiative, at least the women parliamentarians are getting together and discussing agendas that is specific to women issues, and that creates that space to discuss, not just among the parliamentarians of both the houses, but also with the civil servant, with the experts, with technical expert, with UN, so that having that space for conversation again, that is very important. If you want a very vibrant democracy, dialogue needs to happen, conversation needs to happen, so then through this conversation that we have an opportunity to support each other. So I think these are the platforms that are needed in the country. Am I worried that women will not come forward? Not really. I am confident that I think Bhutanese women are very strong, very competent, very capable, and today with the appointment of 3 secretaries in the bureaucracy, I think we have seen it, and all 3 in a most unconventional sector that you might say, finance, foreign labor, very unconventional, and heading these 3 very unconventional ministries by these 3 amazing women is a clear indication that there are many lined up to take these positions.
I think we've reached that point in the time when it's if we could have the questions that might be coming in from outside the room. Ugan, would you like to, or Pema, whichever of you choose, could you read out the questions, and you might want to just, how many questions are there? 4 questions. Would you like to take them all at the same time? And maybe we can also have a few questions from inside the room. We have a few colleagues from the journalist media houses. So we'll take the 4 questions first, and you may respond to those, and then we'll go from inside the room. Ugan first.
As mental health patients are mainly being treated in the district and referral hospitals, what are MIMPO's views on providing mental care at the community level? How much of the MOH budget is allocated towards mental health care? And for the UN, how much does the UN allocate its financial support to the government for mental health? The third question, how do you think we can link mental health care with other sectors such as education? And the last one is, mental health priority and advocacy is given to youth, but most of the time, and lesser attention is paid to the mental health care of elder citizens. What measures can the government as a whole do to prioritize the mental health of elder people and advocate on it?
I think it's very important, especially given that majority of our population are residing in rural areas where the community vitality is very high and community network is very good. So I think we may not be labeling it as a mental health intervention per se, but if you go to the community, if somebody passed away, the whole community comes and helps in and then provide that support. That is a mental health. It's just that we are not putting it as a mental health intervention. So if you look at within the national key result area under the GNH framework, we have community vitality. And that is something that we often study and survey as well. And that is fairly good, especially in the rural areas. Now, where we see these networks not as well developed is in many urban cities, where we have smaller families, smaller networks. But in the rural areas, the support network is very good, Seshunila. In terms of managing patient at the hospitals and the BHUs, of course, now when you're talking about mental health, you are talking about various mental health issues. So if you look at alcohol, for example, as of now, alcohol detox services, rehabilitation services are provided to the BHU levels, where we do treatment, detox services, and then refer them for rehabilitation for alcohol. Suicide prevention is the same. It is decentralized to the BHU levels. Now, how good these referral systems are, that is something that we need to focus on a little more attention, so that we are able to provide this patient-centric care. And see if there is somebody who has intention to do a self-harm, how do we take care of this person and provide the needed support. In terms of the budget itself, like I mentioned earlier, mental health is, first of all, it is cross-cutting. And second of all, it has not gotten the focus it deserves. And this is probably where I also would like to, I see Will there, I would like to actually acknowledge Will for within the UN. I think fair to say Will was probably the first one to actually highlight that there is this urgency to look at mental health and address mental health. Now, even when we look at the UN system, I don't know if we can translate monetary allocation to services. It is rather to do with, if we say, okay, we invest 1 million and we see 1 million impact. I don't think so we can equate that, Seshunila. So allocation of budget is more important rather than the allocation of budget itself, is the efficiency in which these services are coordinated within the sector. Because like I said, having one person say this is a mental health program, but mental health is cross-cutting everything. From the time you are born, a pregnant mother coming in with after delivery, postpartum depression, how do we deal with that? No. And after the child is born, child gets into trouble. Then how do you deal with that? No. After that, the child goes to school, develops an addiction. How do we deal with that? The parent part, the child part, and then till you actually till the end of life. So this is where we are saying that I think we want to approach a life cycle based approach to mental health, where we look at it from the conception till the death and say, what is mental health? Not only mental health to prevent mental health crisis, psychosis, depression, no, but rather how do we at the same time promote mental health and well-being? How can you teach people to be happy, content? No. So this is where we are looking at the moment. So I don't think so that it will be fair to say, I can give you the exact figure of the budget, But then that does not mean that it is not a priority. It is a priority for the UN. Both Will and Gerald will agree with me that it is a big priority for the UN as well. And same for the Ministry of Health, because by definition of health, health is not just a mere absence of illness, but it's also well-being of an individual at the individual level. So I think to go on to the budget, I think it will not be a fair, benchmark to put a weight on the agenda. On the education, absolutely. If you look at abuse, substance abuse, alcohol, addiction, these are all happening in young children. So I think education plays an important role. Should be one of our main partners. 97% of our youth are in some institution, whether that be in primary school, high school, college, so that we have a big chunk of our population in educational institution. So they have to come on board as one of the main partners. But then not only just, this is where when we talk about the Her Majesty's initiative, it's not just go to school and talk about how important mental health is and all that, but actually how do we mainstream so that it forms the core of the curriculum. So we build resilience of our children at a very young age from the schools. So I think education is and will be a very big partner to this initiative. The last question on the elderly. Of course, Her Majesty's initiative at the moment is not only looking at mental health, it's looking at the 5 most vulnerable population in the country. Abuse, domestic sexual abuse, substance addiction, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, suicide prevention, elderly population, and people living with disability. So these are population that Her Majesty would like to see a comprehensive system in place where we take care of every single individual with these issues. So this is where we are looking at the system itself. So once we have a system like this in place, then I think we can truly call ourselves a GNH nation. So personally, professionally, I'm extremely happy. I think more than happy to see this initiative, a historic initiative under the benevolent leadership of our Queen.
So again, we'll take questions from any or all of the 5. Checo, maybe you want to start?
The schools, if you look at the school system in Bhutan, we have 1 counselor for 1,000 children, so which is very negligible compared to the international standard. And now, since Her Excellency mentioned that the education sector is very important agency, we can look at this. But that there is again this friction with the RCSC. We have heard that even though Education Ministry wants to employ more school counselors, there's restrictions and reservations from the RCSC. So how could the Health Ministry intervene in this?
I'm Nimoge from Kusal, and then my question is, I would appreciate if Mijay could explain the main causes of the mental health. And recently what I heard was, one of the causes was rural-urban migration, whereby old people are being brought to the city who are not really used to living in such kind of atmosphere, and then they are being kept in the rooms. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is the atmosphere that they have been living for a long time in the villages are totally different from what we have here today. So, how serious is this? So, I would really appreciate if you would explain this. Thank you.
My question is based on policy, mental policy. Bhutan, we have framed national policy in 1997, And I think even the UN report has pointed out that there is a gap, that is no legislation. And in several meetings, it was also pointed that our policy should be reviewed now. If NIPU could share on this policy review. And one thing is NIPU spoke on the capacity building. On capacity building, okay, out of 708 schools, there are only around 82 trained counselors. If we are to focus in mental health issues, and if we are to give priorities to the mental health, I think it is important that we focus in building capacity. And when we talk about building capacity, I think we should train our mental health professional beside infrastructure also. In other countries, I think they have a separate mental health hospital, but in Bhutan, we don't have. Actually, it's done together. So what do you say on this in training professionals? Thank you.
So I believe that we have only three psychiatrists in the country. That also in GD. And then, so is the health ministry looking into having more psychiatrists in the country now?
Currently, there is lack of coordination among the stakeholders when it comes to mental health issues. So, how the Ministry of Health is working to strengthen the coordination among the stakeholders, not only with the Ministry of Education, with CSO and other stakeholders.
I think the first question was on the counselors, number of counselors. I absolutely agree. But I think, do we wait to produce counselors? And when I say produce counselors, not just undergoing few weeks training, but actually competent, capable counselors, then I think we are looking at least 2 decades. No? Because we have to look at the production capacity. No? So, but are we looking at mainstreaming? So what is important when we are dealing with masses? When we are dealing with one patient, a psychiatric patient, then you want to have that psychiatrist manage that because there's a defined case. In the institution, what are we looking at? Are we looking at vulnerable, identification of vulnerable children? No? And then referring them once. Not all, if you have 100 students, not 100 students will be vulnerable. So from there, say 2 vulnerable. How do we identify them and refer them to a service, a mental health services? No? So this is where I think just now we are discussing whether how can we mainstream into every curriculum, teaching curriculums, whereby teachers are able to do that. Not just leave it up to the so-called designated counselor. Oh, we need to identify, so we need to call the designated counselor and have him or her go through every child. No, but rather should we give this competency and capacity to every teacher so they are able to identify major issues and be able to immediately refer them to our services. No, so this is where we are looking at. Now, should we have designated counselor who will do that with expertise, and how long will that take? But urgently, what can we do? Short term, long term, medium term. Ideally, we would like to have the counselors to student ratio being narrowed to say 1:100. But then, how long will that take? That's a process, So we just can't churn out counselors like we are churning out any other field, no? So this is where we are having the discussions, Shunila. So once we mainstream, then we know the discussion with RCSC is not even an issue. Because every teacher will have to be mindful of the student you are working with. And that mental health is not there as a big mental health flag, but rather that it is part of your everyday assessment. That you are able to, walking into a classroom, you are able to identify. So can we do that by mainstreaming it in a curriculum? Absolutely. No? Can we use tools for screening every child? No? Absolutely. Why not? So I think these are innovations. Now, traditionally identifying a focal person, counselor, I think that we have been doing it and not so well. So this is where now we are looking at, okay, how can we change? How can we look at a different model and see, will that work? Will that work? We're not sure. Are we willing to give it a try? Absolutely. No? So these are the discussions that we are having at the moment, Shunila. In terms of Nima's question on the main cause of mental health, I think that really depends. If you look at many studies, studying in a particular segment of the population, it will be very different. If you study mental health among prisoners, their causes would be very different from mental health issue among pregnant mothers, among workers, among civil servant. So all the causes of mental health will be very different, Salamni. So I think it really depends on the physical environment you are in, the cultural networks, social constructs, and physiologically. When, as a woman, I know probably if you are pregnant, you are delivering, you probably have, because of the hormones, you probably are more inclined to developing certain signs and symptoms of mental health. Will that be short-term, long psychosis, temporary depression, acute depression? I mean, those will vary. So I don't think so. It will be fair for me to say with my limited capacity that this is a particular cause of mental health and we must eliminate and then they will not have mental health. No, depends on rural-urban migration as you highlighted. Absolutely. You're coming from a society, from a network where you have your grandparents, your aunties, uncle you can talk to, and suddenly you're in all Thimphu, all alone, you have very few friends. I think you will go through some distress. No? So I think all these factors will play into identifying a main cause phenomena. So, and then on the national policy itself, I would also like to correct that 1997, it was when the program actually started. So mental health per se has strategies, but not as a national policy. It is reflected in the national health policy. There is a component on mental health within the national health policy. We have a national health strategy, a mental health strategy, where it charts out how the governance should be, how the program should be implemented. But the 1997 is when we actually have the program. Ministry of Health has a mental health program. It's a very small program. So that was started in 1997, Sishunila. Then on the capacity building, again, health facilities, I want to inform the floor here, probably the PEMA Center that we inaugurated recently by Her Majesty is going to be a mental health hospital. We're not calling it a mental health hospital, we're calling it the PEMA Center. Why? Because it's actually Her Majesty's aspiration. PEMA is a lotus, grows in a very dirty water, but it blossoms into a beautiful flower. So that it itself is a connotation that every human being has a potential to blossom and have an opportunity to be a productive citizen. So the PEMA Center that will be on the JD campus will manage very acute cases of mental health. So if you're extreme depression, psychosis, all that elements will be managed there. So for that matter, the detox services will happen there. The treatment component will happen there, and then eventually be moved into a rehabilitation center. So the objective now is no longer about treating the element, treating the patient, but rather Her Majesty's aspiration is how do we make that individual a productive citizen of the country. Yes, we will treat you, but if you treat and you are staying home and doing nothing, then again, that does not contribute to us nation building. So now the goal is, through the rehabilitation and aftercare or reskilling program, the ultimate goal is to make that individual a productive citizen. a contributing, productive citizen, a Bhutanese citizen. So that is the aspiration of Her Majesty Sishunila. So this is where now the acute case management, rehabilitation, reskilling. So all is coming as a package with the guidance from Her Majesty. I think the last question on the psychiatrist itself, we know KGUMS already has a PG residency program on psychiatry. This is where I think every year we have two. We have two undergoing here and then two outside. So by 2023, we should have 4 of them graduating. So the idea is to hopefully, once we have the psychiatric department here fully functioning, then we will probably have that 2 units in the 2 referral hospital as well, one being at Mongal and the other one being at Gilifu. So slowly the psychiatric services will start in this two referral hospital as well. Do we see the need to have psychiatric department in every district? Absolutely not, because the caseload itself will not be there. So this is where at the moment we will build the psychiatric department here in Thimphu, and then we will possibly look at developing the psychiatric department in the 2 referral hospitals, Gilfu and Mongala. Anichila.
Thank you for those insightful questions and even more insightful answers. Limpo, both yourself and myself, we share a deep and continuing interest in the sustainability of the CSOs in this country. Of course, your own party has this commitment to narrowing the gap, which so closely aligns with the values of the CSOs. And as we were discussing before we started this session, last week there was a very powerful meeting between the CSOs, Lynchen, yourself and 3 other Limpos. So a real practical commitment we can see here from the government to supporting the CSOs. What are the 2 priorities we should focus on over the coming 2 years to strengthen the CSOs in Bhutan?
I think taking cue from the comments made by Prime Minister himself, and I want to quote him, where he said the CSOs will have unconditional support. And I think that's a huge commitment. And that commitment stems out of our belief that they do play a very important role in the society. For us, I think CSOs have developed a guideline on the modality of working modality between the CSOs and government. How can we collaborate with each other? How do we work together? And I want to emphasize on the word working together, because that is important. Because there is goodwill and intention both from the government and from the CSOs as well to work together. And this guideline will be the framework that will guide us in terms of going forward onto this partnership, working with CSOs. Then the second one, of course, is, as you are aware, that we have the CSO Act that is being drafted and being tabled, and that is a historic moment for the current government as well. That in itself shows that we are committed to strengthening our CSOs. We recognize their contribution for reaching the unreached, and there's a huge potential to work together and collaborate. And these are 2 things that I am personally, as you mentioned, coming from the CSO background, and having that big space in my heart that I am extremely excited about, and I think this can serve as a model for other countries as well in the region, if we can get this through comfortably.
So the next question, of course, is it's asking your advice for the 31 UN agencies that work in Bhutan, but also the other development partners. In terms of the vulnerable people of Bhutan, including those with mental health challenges. How can the 31 UN agencies and the other development partners, how can we raise our game so that at the end of the next 2 years you will be able to say, yeah, these development partners, they're pulling their weight?
And I think first I must start by thanking your leadership in terms of really making UN relevant. I'm looking at the SDG goals, and I know the UN agencies will always be guided by these goals. And if you look at these goals, you are once again reminded of the vulnerable population that we must take care of it. And I think first and foremost is which you always do, I think, not just think, I think I'm fairly confident, is keeping Bhutan in the mind.
Mm.
And whatever you do must benefit the nation that you are serving, benefit the people that you are serving, and really envision where you Bhutan wants. We have a vision where we want to see Bhutan. His Majesty always says we must, if we want to go into the 21st century, we must invest in the human capital, build the competency and the capacity of the Bhutanese people, because at the end of the day, that is what matters. So this is where we look to our partners, like the UN, to guide us and see what is relevant. Share us idea, have this space for dialogue, have conversation, and because at the end of the day, I think whether UN or Bhutan, you always have the national interests at heart, and I think this is where conversation is important, dialogue is important, agree to disagree is important. So I think these are the things that you're already doing as a UN agencies, and we hope to see more of that, more of conversation, dialogue, because at the end it's not about pointing fingers and saying you're doing this wrong, you're doing this. It's about working together for the common good, and acknowledging each other's strength, weaknesses, but moving forward together. So I feel that is important.
So, of course, so much of your work since you've become a minister 3 years ago is as dedicated to responding to COVID. And we also know that not only are you the Minister of Health, but you're also the President of the World Health Assembly of the World Health Organization. Incredible responsibilities, Limpo. Going forward, how do you expect the pandemic to evolve? How do you expect the pandemic to evolve? And where do you see the opportunities for the economy, even as Bhutan maximizes the emphasis on the safety of its people?
I think in the capacity of the WHO President, I think before we even go into how the pandemic will evolve, I think we must also acknowledge what the pandemic has highlighted. I think it has grossly magnified the inequality that exists globally along our traditional fault line of resources, human capital, financial power, and political influence. And then the second is the centrality of health, that we often talk about. If as a kid we used to say, if there is no health, there is nothing. And this time it is true that if there is no health, there is nothing. And we realize that WHO, for example, have been advocating for leaving no one behind for the longest time, since the Alma Ata Declaration in the 1970s, before I was born. And yet we are still having this conversation after, 5 decades? Almost 5 decades? Still leaving no one behind. By now we should have not left anybody behind. you know. So the agendas are moving very slowly. So this is where I think we have a great opportunity. The inequality that is being magnified in terms of access to vaccine. I think we have an opportunity as powerful nation must come forward with their commitments, come forward to help the weaker countries, must support the weaker countries. And I think this is where the overall global or the humanity responsibility lies. So this is where I think and the WHO and in many other platforms that I have raised this, and I must give credit again to Will for our conversation when this early on happened on the humanitarian corridor that we often discuss. And I think this is something that is very, very important. So as we go forward with the upcoming special session of WHO discussing the preparedness treaty, I think we must keep in mind that human life, doesn't matter where you are, where you live, who you are, life is a life, and we must value it. So this is where I hope the humanitarian corridor that I have been advocating for a very long time, I hope that this will become a reality as we look forward to the preparedness treaty, where we'll have an opportunity to help weaker nations, both economically, socially, human resource-wise, so that the richer countries, more powerful countries must have the responsibility to help the weaker ones. So this is where I'm hoping and praying that this discourse will go through as we discuss the post-pandemic. Vaccination, of course, is picking up, but there are also a lot of uncertainty at the moment. Do we know that the virus is not mutating? Not yet. Do we know that the vaccines are working? Not fully, because we're still seeing breakthrough cases among fully vaccinated. We are seeing higher mortality among people who are fully vaccinated. So these are still a very vivid evidence of uncertainty, not knowing what is next. So it is also very difficult to chart a way forward with this kind of uncertainty at the moment. In terms of economy, Bhutan probably, I often joke, say this, Bhutanese people are the only people who probably did not check their bank account to see how they are going to pay for the treatment, because everything was taken care of by the government. And more importantly, when the crisis hit, I think through His Majesty's Kidu initiative, the most vulnerable, economically affected were taken care. And we continue to receive this benefit from His Majesty the King. We have always chose life over livelihood. And we always feel that, life is important. So I often get asked, what is the dividend of the COVID intervention? And I always say today the biggest dividend we have of the very caution intervention that or strategy that we have adopted is that we still have our grandparents with us. We still have our older parents with us, So for me, every morning coming down, having tea with my father is a blessing. If not for the measures that we have taken, he will not be with me today. And I know I echo many people around the world where they have lost generation of grandparents and parents to COVID. And we Bhutanese have the luxury of having our grandparents with us, having our mother, parents with us. So I think the uncertainty is one. Economy, of course, we have to balance as we go into it. But I also feel that I think if we are healthy, if we are morally strong, then I think we can recover. And when we do open, we will open in a manner that will be very different. So like I mentioned earlier, do we want to go to pre-pandemic? Not really. In the post-pandemic era, we don't want to go to the pre-endemic stage. We actually want to go forward as a nation. We want to bring in innovation. We want to take Bhutan to the 21st century. And I think this is a time where we are all looking at our system and saying, okay, how can we take Bhutan to the 21st century? Can we do? And it's a good moment of reflection and planning. So I look at it very positively and say, this is a period where we need to plan. When the world opens up, we'll be ready to take Bhutan to the 21st century.
We're coming towards the close, but very briefly, Limpo, earlier on in this session you spoke about personal resilience. What are your daily practices that you follow to keep you physically and mentally strong?
I think my sanity is my 5-kilometer run every morning. If I don't do that, I think I'll lose my sanity for sure. That is one. And then the second one is, of course, finding time to be with my son. That's always a ray of sunshine for me. That's always a mental pickup for me, knowing that whatever I'm doing today, in my small way, contributing to his tomorrow, so that he can have a better future.
Limpo, this has been a really comprehensive conversation. I think the questions that have come from the journalists here in UN House, from those questions from online, were really great questions. And your transparency, your frankness, your commitment to accountability, your commitment to the most vulnerable in this society, we all found truly inspiring. Kadin Shela, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you all.